Okay, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. My name is John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what we do are these Webmaster Office Hours Hangouts, where webmasters and publishers and SEOs can join in and ask us any kind of web search, website-related questions that we might be able to help with. Looks like we have a bunch of new faces as well. Do any of you who haven't regularly made these Hangouts want to get started with a question? If not, that's fine too. We will definitely have more time for questions towards the end. Or if you have anything to add to any of the other questions that were submitted, feel free to jump on in then as well.
I've got
Hello, John.
a question.
OK.
It's all right. You can go first.
You
I'm not
can
sure.
go first. No worries. No,
You go first.
You can go first. You can go first. No worries.
All right. Okay. Right. Okay. So the other week there was a little bit of an experiment done by somebody who turned their crawl stats up to high. Yeah, I don't know whether you saw it on Twitter. It was Oliver Mason. And I'm intrigued. You know, the crawl stats that have like the defaults in there and the site settings that kind of seem to be like gathered over time. Are there buckets that the settings kind of fall into? So a lot of them seem to be set to 333.333 seconds between requests. Yeah, there seems to be like certain defaults, if you like, that seem to maybe fit in with different types of CMSs or different types of platforms, or it's almost like well, if it's this type of site, we'll do this. But if it's on a CDN, we'll add this bit. And if it's got, if it's this much traffic, then we'll do this. Or there seems to be like very clear patterns. And it seems it's like a combination of various factors that you could just like very easily just sort of ascertain what they are, really. If it's on managed independent server, if it's on a CDN, if it's on Shopify, if it's different types of CMSs, I don't know. There seems to be some patterns there.
I don't know. I totally didn't see that. So it's hard to say. But I mean, we take a bunch of stuff into account when it comes to determining how fast we want to crawl. And part of that is also like what we actually have to crawl or that we want to have indexed. So it's not always just like a technical limit. It's sometimes just like what we think about the site, what we think makes sense in regards to crawling there.
So if it's a site, for instance, that has had issues with maybe quality or low importance, lots and lots of too many pages, yeah, that if you switch it to high, you're not necessarily going to get a massive crawl, are you? If you say, please crawl, it's a request rather than an actual instruction, isn't it? You can still, it's not to do with speed, it's to do with other stuff as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's more like setting it to high essentially just says, well, if Google wants to crawl more, they're able to crawl more. It's not the case that we will crawl more. And I think it's also important to mention here that crawling doesn't mean ranking. So it's not that you need to have like lots of crawling in order to rank high. We can rank things high that we crawl very rarely. So it's something where you don't have to artificially increase the crawl rate in the hope that it improves your website standing on Google.
Okay. All right, but if you've got a load of stuff from an old website still in the index and you're trying to switch everything over, that actually, getting this new stuff crawled would help, presumably, to replace the signals that are still in the index from the old site that's still there, yeah, potentially. But if you've got issues on that site, historically, you probably just by switching it to high, it's not going to make, Google's not just going to come flying over and just like start tearing through your website, is it?
Probably not. So I don't know. You're making me really curious. I'm tempted to go off on Twitter and try to find that. But I
Okay.
For the most
Unless
part,
somebody else have a question.
really a technical thing. It's more a matter of like how much we can crawl from your server, and setting it to high is kind of a way of telling us, well, actually Google could crawl a bit more if they really wanted to, but it doesn't mean that we will actually crawl more.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Hello, John.
Hi.
Hi. How are you?
Very good.
Okay. Recently, we faced an issue with one of our client website. I think they have some problem with their web developer, and their web developer has access to their Google Webmaster Tool account. Now, this the web developer, what they did, they use Google Webmaster Tool temporary hide option to remove the website from Google search result temporarily. And they did it, and as a result, when we search on Google using their brand name, we did not find their website on Google search result. And we also found that their URL is removed from the Google Business Listing. So now we also found in Google Webmaster Tool there is an option for re-include the website, but every time we click on the re-include button, Google Webmaster Tool show a message that there is an error, please try a few minutes later. So we tried for 2 days. Every time we click on the button, we got this message. So is there any other way to fix the issue?
The re-include button is really the right way to do that. I don't know, what you might be able to do is take a screenshot of the message that you're seeing, and either send that to me or post that in the help forum, and then maybe someone can take a look at that to see what specifically is happening there. I'm not aware of anything general that would say like re-including removed URLs should not work. So if you have that button there, then that should actually work. What you might need to watch out for is that you have the full access to the site, also that you double check the different versions of the site. So HTTP, HTTPS, www, non-www, to make sure that all of those are also re-included.
Okay. And the next question is one of our client, they designed their website a little bit a strange way. For example, they have About Us page, and on About Us page, they have content. Now they post the content 2 times on same page, one for the mobile version, another one for desktop version. So when I when I open the website on desktop, I can only see the desktop version, but there is also the text appearing, but it is hidden. So now the problem is this hidden text will be a problem?
That shouldn't be a problem. That's something that we can still see if it's visible if it's kind of in the HTML of the page. So it probably doesn't make sense to hide that kind of a text, but at the same time, it's not going to negatively affect the rest of your website.
Because the problem is this is not only for one page, this is for their all page, have same issue.
Okay.
I don't know how they designed this website, but we found the same issue on the whole website, and they launched this website in the beginning of this year, and after launching the website, they lost the ranking. They were in very good ranking with the old website, but after launching this website, they lost ranking for a lot of keywords. So do you think this is the effect?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I would probably recommend fixing, but I doubt that would be a reason for us to kind of rank the website lower. I think the thing to keep in mind whenever you do a complete relaunch of a website, even if you use the same URLs, and often people don't use the same URLs with a relaunch, we have to reevaluate the website based on the current status. So changes in ranking are always possible when you do a relaunch of a website, especially if there is less content on the page, if the important content is not available on the page anymore, if some of the content has moved into images that we can't kind of read the text out of. All of these things can play a role when you do a relaunch. And essentially, we're looking at the new website and trying to rank it based on what we see there.
Okay, John. Thank you, John.
Sure. I mean, it's always tricky with these kind of changes that happened quite a while ago. So I would clean this up, but I would also just kind of look at the old version of the website in archive.org, which is a way of kind of looking at the older versions of pages, and just double check to make sure that you didn't lose any content with this redesign, and that the internal linking is still pretty good, that we can crawl everything, that we can pick up all of the content with that relaunch.
Yeah, thank you.
OK, let me run through some of the submitted questions, and then we'll have more time for comments from you in between or questions afterwards as well. It seems Google is testing longer descriptions in search results. Should we prepare to include longer content in our meta description tags? In general, you can do that if you want to. This is not something where we've ever kind of restricted you and said you shouldn't put this much content in your description tag. Sometimes we will pick up more content from a description meta tag. Sometimes we'll take less. Sometimes we'll take some content from the body of the page as well. All of these are things that are essentially a part of the normal kind of organic search results. So it's something where we've always kind of tried to figure out what makes sense to show to a user there. And it's also important to keep in mind that we change the description and the title based on the query sometimes. So if you use a site query to see how your pages are showing up in search, that's not necessarily what a normal user would see when they do a search. So I would take the queries that you see in Search Console and search for those specifically, and then look at the way we show the search results there to get a bit of a better understanding of how we're currently presenting your pages in the search results. We attended a Hangout a few weeks back as we're having issues with our homepage not ranking for our brand name. I think we looked at this in the help forum. So I don't know if you're here or not. But I think the tricky part here is that this is a website that essentially is offering adult content. So it's something where it's sometimes really hard for us to figure out how we should be ranking it appropriately with regards to different types of queries. So that's something where sometimes you run into this kind of a tricky area where you think maybe your homepage is kind of safe search friendly in a rough sense of the phrase. But our algorithms, when they look at your website overall, they still see all of this adult content around there where you're selling, I guess, all of the sex toys that are being sold there. That's something which we also try to take into account. We try to figure out, like, where does it actually make sense to show these web pages for which type of queries. And in talking with our engineers, they understand this is a kind of a weird edge case situation where maybe we could be doing this better, or probably we could be doing this better. But it's also kind of the situation where it's essentially an adult kind of website. So that's what our algorithms are mostly treating it as. We've recently had an SEO consultant recommend that we make our 404 error page and on-site search no results pages unique by adding some kind of dynamic information to the pages. Do 404 pages and no results found pages really count as duplicate content in the eyes of Google? So for us, if a page returns a 404 result code, we ignore all of the content on that page. So if this is a 404 error page that's returning 404 correctly, you can do whatever you want on that page to make it user-friendly, to make it usable for users. But Googlebot is not going to take that into account. So you can put links on there to appropriate products, maybe related products, if you can figure out what they were trying to look at. That makes it a lot easier for users to actually stay on your site and do something useful on your site. But Google is not going to follow those links or take that content into account. The same roughly applies to no results found pages, which are essentially soft 404 pages in our mind, in that essentially someone is searching for content, and you're saying, well, this content isn't available on my website, and we treat that as a 404 page. So that's also not something where you need to artificially introduce content or links or anything to those pages to make them appear unique. It's perfectly fine to have those be generic, to have those have kind of the same content across the pages there. Disavow not required as Google discounts the links. So when Google decides to take manual action for partial unnatural links. So partial unnatural links, manual action is when the web spam team looks at a website and sees that there's a group of links pointing to this site which are unnatural, which are kind of things that we wouldn't want to take into account. And they essentially discount those through the web spam side. And they let you know about that. So if you want to clean that up, you can do that. But if you don't want to clean that up, that's generally fine as well. So from that point of view, that's essentially kind of doing the same thing as our algorithms when they try to take into account unnatural links. One kind of common situation where this happens is when someone is trying to do reputation management and artificially push some article on your website that they like to kind of rank higher than the content that they're trying to kind of have shown lower in the search results. And from our point of view, it's not the case that you're trying to spam Google by placing artificial links to these pages. It's someone else that's trying to do that. So the web spam team tries to clean that up and just say, well, these are the things that we're not going to take into account. And they let you know about that kind of just as a matter of record. And if you're fine with that, that's perfectly fine to keep it like that. A couple months ago, I asked whether you could provide. Oh, go for it. Don.
On that subject, on the subject of disavows, I know that this has been like quite a bit of a hot potato of late. Whether we should just trust Google to understand when something is really like kind of a negative SEO type thing. So if, for instance, you suddenly start, because one of my projects suddenly started getting some really, really nasty links and pretty horrendous messages at me personally in the links, yeah. Should I disavow that, or should I just presume that I can trust Google to realize that it's just people are a bit nasty sometimes?
No,
what
I don't know. Personally, I would just disavow those to kind of say, well, I'm sure Google's not going to take these into account if I disavow them. And then it's like you don't have to worry about whether or not Google's algorithms will decide this is good or bad. Then you've essentially just taken care of it and don't have to worry about it anymore. I think for the most part, we probably take that into account automatically as well. But it's kind of like for peace of mind and just for sleeping better at night in general, it's kind of like you just want to make sure that this is really taken out of kind of our algorithms, and with the disavow.
Yeah. So for instance, this one had like location-based anchors in it as well. So it kind of makes me a bit suspicious that actually it might be some competitors in the same city as me, perhaps. So, you know, that potentially could have quite a negative impact if, you know, on things around location, couldn't it? If it wasn't picked up on well by your algorithms.
Yeah, I mean, if you
run,
I would just disavow them.
Disavow.
Yeah, I think the average website that doesn't like dig into their links, they generally don't need to care about this. Like they're not going to know about these links and about the disavow tool, and that's perfectly fine. But if you're looking into your links and kind of like worried about these things, I would just disavow them and move on, and then you really don't need to worry about like what happens with the rest of Google's algorithms.
And if these are the ones that showed up in Google Search Console, rather than just the massive like wealth of other links that are out there, that's probably one that I could think, Google knows about this link. So actually I should probably disavow it because it's going to be taken into consideration somehow because it's in Search Console. Even if you, I don't know, I'm not I'm not 100% convinced that actually it's going to just be completely ignored. I did see like I've seen fluctuation around these things.
Yeah, I mean, if you see them and you're worried about them, I would just disavow them. Just because they're in Search Console doesn't mean that we actively like use them in our algorithms. It's just we've seen them and we want to let you know about them. So that's kind of tricky to make the assumption that actually this has an effect just because it's listed there. But it's like I would just disavow them if you don't want to be associated with them, and then kind of move on.
Hi, John.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a little question. We have noticed a deep increase in visit coming from Google News and Hub pages since the beginning of October. There have been many reports of similar situation on Google Webmaster Central by many websites. This has been confirmed to me also by other online newspaper we are working with. Has been Google News algorithm update with regard how articles are displayed into the carousel or other
So I guess with regards to the top stories carousel,
top stories,
that's something that from our point of view is an organic search feature. And since it's fairly new, the engineers and the quality team are actively working on that. So I would expect kind of changes to take place there over time. Normal at the moment in that we get a lot of feedback about the content that we show there, and we try to make sure that it's taken into account and that we can show relevant results there. And sometimes it makes sense for us to say, OK, we'll be a little bit more cautious and maybe show a little bit less here. Sometimes we can be a bit more direct and show more content there. But it's really something where the engineers are actively working on those algorithms and trying to see what works best, which kind of settings or algorithms don't work so well there, to kind of actively work on that.
I have two questions about these two topics. So going back to the first topic was the disavow file. What is your personal thoughts about creating a master disavow file, John? Like, for example, I mean, I've been working with a lot of websites. So during the time, I collected like thousands of sites that are spammy for sure. So what do you believe? Like, do you think creating a master disavow file and uploading this to all the sites I manage is a good strategy or not?
I don't know. I mean, it's something where if we don't have links from those domains and you disavow them, that's it like doesn't change anything. I don't know if that actually helps under the line, or if it's essentially kind of a placebo in that you're uploading a disavow file, but actually it doesn't have any effect. So you're kind of putting extra maintenance burden on you to kind of maintain these files that actually don't even play a role for those specific sites. So that's kind of where I'd say, well, maybe it helps to kind of analyze the links that are going to a site and say, well, these are all known spammy ones anyway. I can kind of automatically put those on my disavow file when I see them coming in. But for the rest, I try to actually focus on what is useful for the site, rather than just to say, well, this is my generic disavow file. I upload this to all my domains, because I don't think that really provides a lot of value in the sense that it has a positive effect on the site.
Yeah, I understand. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there is no trust factor about the disavow files. For example, like if my disavow file is complete mess, it's still, you still look at my disavow file as a directive, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
definitely
perfect.
I mean, it's more I see it more as a maintenance overhead, in that you're uploading all of these files, and if the next webmaster doesn't really know what's happening, they look at this file and they're like, oh, I have no idea what this is supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing with it. Like, should I be updating this monthly? And in the end, it turns out, well, actually, none of these links ever played a role for this website. So it's kind of, I don't know, unnecessary work.
Yeah. And the second question is about a recent topic, and it also goes to the news as well. So in the Black Friday, the Black Friday is about a sales event, and during that time, it becomes also kind of like a newsworthy search query. So from what I've seen, there are many sites that are producing a lot of sales event related content, but also newspaper use their freshness signal advantage in a way that they start producing, instead of newsworthy articles, rather than they start creating some commercial articles. And then they start ranking #1 for that query during the Black Friday, and which has millions of, search volume. So I believe this kind of creates a little bit of a interesting user experience, because as a user, if my query is informational, I would like to get information about the Black Friday. But I think during that time, it becomes rather commercial than informational, but Google still shows news sites rather than sales event sites. What do you think?
I don't know whether this helps, but I was at a recent thing not long ago, and actually, certain events have query intent shift. So Black Friday might mean something differently today as two words, just words, to next week or last month. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, what happens is search engines kind of understand what people are specifically looking for with just those words without much else, based on popularity. Query intent shift, I don't know whether that...
Yeah.
It's around Easter. The example I had was like Easter means different things, just as that word. A month before Easter, people are looking for when it is. So Black Friday, a month before, people want to know what date it's on. 2 weeks before, people want to know with Easter where they can go. And then at Easter itself, people want to know the meaning of it. So I don't know whether that it just shifts.
Yeah, it's something where it's definitely worth getting feedback on these type of things, but I don't think there is like this one absolute answer that is perfectly correct for situations like that. It's something that changes over time, and I think some amount of newsworthy content also belongs in there, because like if people are searching for Black Friday, like what commercial stuff would you bring them? It's like everyone has a Black Friday sale. We might as well show like just pure ads across the board. I don't think that would make sense either, because you're not really saying like what do you want to see for Black Friday? Is it like you want to see the total revenue that was turned over, or do you want to see like which stores have Black Friday sales? It's like such a generic query that I don't think there's like this one thing that you could show there that would actually be the correct answer.
I agree, actually, very, very much. I agree in a big extent. But what I was trying to get into is like, as an ex-web spam fighter for 5 years as well, I think it becomes like a bit tricky that what newspapers, actually most of the big publishers is doing. They first create the newsworthy assets in their websites to rank up there. And after that, most of the newspaper I've seen, because during that day I didn't even sleep, because I'm running 100 sites about Black Friday. And then what they were doing is they were start changing their articles to collaborations with the commercial things. And sometimes they even used no-followed affiliate links and stuff. So, the newspapers have such a big power. So when they shift their content 180, they still rank for amazing generic queries. And I think this kind of becomes an abuse. Just wanted to get your opinion on this one.
Yeah, I mean, that can definitely be the case. But talking with newspapers, they're usually more of the opinion that actually their content isn't being taken into account that much on Google, and they'd like to see more of it being taken into account. So it's kind of like different people have different opinions there. But it's definitely something where trying to find abuse there is tricky, because these things are very quickly moving, and sometimes they have really, really big waves that are kind of happening there with lots of people searching, lots of people putting content out, like within a short period of time, where it's really hard to kind of stay on top of it from an algorithmic point of view, but also from kind of an abuse and web spam and a quality point of view. So that's certainly a tricky area.
Hey, John.
Hi, John. We are adding a new hamburger menu to our website, both mobile and desktop version, which is going to contain all the main navigational elements of the page. This menu is hidden by default using JavaScript and shown only when the user clicks on it. My questions are, is Google Crawler able to read the navigational links with this implementation, or it will be considered hidden content and therefore not read? Does it make any difference using CSS, display none, instead of JavaScript for the hidden menu?
As long as the content is on the HTML page, then we should be able to take that into account.
Okay, even if it is hidden via JavaScript.
Yeah.
So Google can crawl
if
it.
you have a link there to another page on your website, you can see, does Googlebot actually crawl that other page? And one way to do this is to maybe put a URL parameter at the end of the URL and just like have $test equals 1 and see if we crawl that URL. And almost certainly we'll crawl that URL, because we have a lot of experience with these kind of menus that kind of pop up and show content and then disappear again after you're finished using them.
Okay, so that's also valid for the desktop version of the website. Okay, and I have another question because just a little before, I heard about something that has changed on AMP pages, and about, in particular, the carousel snippet. So I would like to know if you have done some rollout that brings some penalty that could affect also this kind of result. That's my question.
So if there's a kind of a penalty that would affect the
carousel results on AMP, on MPA pages.
I don't think we have any kind of penalty on that. The only thing that we have with regards to manual actions on AMP is something that we're planning to roll out, which is if we can tell that the AMP page has significantly less content than the actual desktop or mobile page, then we won't treat it as an AMP. That's something we did a blog post about, I think, last week. Usually, this is something which is very obvious, that you have a full article when you read it normally on desktop or on mobile, and on AMP, it's just like the heading, and then it's like click here to read more, where it's basically just a simplified version on the AMP page. And that's a really bad user experience, and that's something that we're taking action on. But apart from that, I'm not aware of any other type of manual action specifically for AMP pages.
Okay, but just to come back to the point, because me and other publishers have seen a huge drop during the first days of October for all the results we had on the carousel, both on AMP and Google News. I've seen myself also a drop in the results for many queries, in which we always showed up on this particular snippet. So I would like to know if there has been a penalty, or that could be right, but we just noticed a drop for these results. So it's something that is very strange. So I would like to know if you know something about this.
I think these are just normal organic changes in the search results. So for us, top stories carousel is a part of the organic search results. And we're actively working on this. So we get a lot of feedback from users around the content that we show there. And that's something where the team is actively working on the algorithms behind that. And sometimes you'll see a big kind of drop in visibility with regards to the top stories carousel. Other times you might see a big rise in visibility when we actually do show more content there. So that's not something that is like a manual action that someone is saying, oh, I don't like your websites, therefore you will show up there. It's more a matter of our algorithms trying to figure out, for this query, it makes sense to show it here, and for other queries, maybe it doesn't make sense to show it.
John, I don't know if you've seen Swan's
thank you, John.
Blog post about the sale event structured data markup spam issue. So first of all, thanks a lot for Trust and Safety team to bring this topic up, because I've been in the SEO, coupon industry and helping most of the websites that I have for SEO for a long while. And I've seen a lot of even the biggest players like Retail Not, that even Google chipped in, they are abusing this sale event markup for a long while. I keep reporting on them and send a lot of reports within my team as well. So now it picked up to a blog post. So does that mean that there will be a manual action sprint going on? Like, is it going to be like really prioritized action, or do we need to send even 10,000 more spam reports?
10,000 more spam reports. I think that would be fantastic. That would definitely keep the team busy here, and they wouldn't have to worry about their job anymore. But it's something where we explicitly want to make sure that people are aware of this issue, because we also run across a lot of people that just put a plugin on their page and then it adds this kind of structured data markup. And they're not even aware that this is actually against our guidelines. So when we do take manual action on these things, we want to make sure that people are aware of what specifically the problem is, and having a blog post like this makes it a little bit easier for them to see, oh, yeah, of course, I did that, and it worked, and Google found out now, and I'll fix it. So that's kind of what we're hoping for there.
Hey, John, I have a question, if you don't mind if I...
All right. Go for it.
Cool, thanks. What are the best practices for keyword density?
Right naturally. We don't actually have anything where in our algorithms we're like, we need to see this amount of keyword density on a page. Instead, we try to understand what the page is naturally about. And sometimes that's like you mention it once, or you mention some random synonym that we can pick up, and that's good enough for us. So that's something where I would write naturally. But at the same time, especially if you're looking at a site that hasn't looked into SEO at all, I would just make sure that at least you're talking about what you're trying to offer there. So I see that a lot with kind of small business websites, in that they'll have hired a designer to actually create the website, and it looks really fancy and fantastic, but you can't tell if they're trying to offer a service or a product, or if they're trying to sell you a book, because it's like such generic content that it's really hard for humans to actually figure out what it is that they want to sell and what they want to rank for. And of course, if humans can't figure it out, then our algorithms are probably never going to figure it out.
But if
John,
it's
on that subject,
sorry, but if humans aren't reading it, but do the bots actually understand natural writing? Like maybe if they see a word,
it's like we have a lot of practice with that, and especially we could tell, like, if you're artificially stuffing keywords in there, then that's it's like really obvious for us to figure out. And
but if you put it like 2 or 3 times versus naturally, or maybe instead of writing it, you would actually write the keyword maybe an extra time.
I don't think it has any big positive effect there. So I would generally just write as natural as possible so that when your users read it, they actually don't get turned off and like run away and like, this guy is just trying to push this down my throat. But actually, like I'm talking the same language as my user, and I understand what problems they're facing and what I can do to kind of help them to solve these issues.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's what I feel too, but you never know. I mean, you hear so much about keyword density and like sometimes you may see results that you think maybe do because the keyword on the page a couple extra times. So yeah, no, thank you for your insight.
Well,
Sure.
if I can comment that's short, but I believe trying to understand Google's algorithm, like how they rank the keywords, rather than thinking about the concepts of the algorithm is really helpful. Like, for example, the main three concepts, what I can see is the term, of course, term frequency, but it's just one of them. Then it comes to the co-occurrence, and then it comes to like TF-IDF, but at the end, it's about the topicality. So I really love the word that John said, like write naturally and rank naturally.
Well, I don't know whether anybody's heard of Firth. Firthian is like, you shall know a word by the company it keeps. I always try and think of that relatedness, so the topical relatedness. That's quite a big, he's quite a big, well-known linguistic chap. So I know that people are kind of moving back to the whole like keyword density thing, which 10 years ago, I think we were all talking about that then. But still, TF-IDF must come into some sort of, it's kind of more or less the same, isn't it, really? But it's just been packaged. It sounds better.
Yeah.
It must have a, but it must play a part somewhere along the line.
I think it's really tricky in the sense that people tend to kind of focus too much on the individual words in a lot of these situations. And then what comes out is something that sounds so unnatural that users don't really realize that it's actually written for them. So that's kind of the tricky part there. And I think using some tools to figure out like what people are actually searching for and making sure that like some of that content is actually on the page definitely makes sense. But I wouldn't go so far as to say, well, it has to be on the page like 2 or 3 times, and every time I mention like in short form, it's better, or I have to put like different spelling variations in there. All of these are things that our algorithms have gotten really good at doing. And especially when you're talking about English content, where we have a ton of practice, that's something where I really don't think it makes sense to kind of artificially try to push things in there that wouldn't naturally be on a page.
Well,
John,
and sorry, I apologize, but what?
Sorry about that.
Yeah, my bad. John, you just said something pretty good about to have some tools to check it out. Do you have any recommended tools for us?
I would use Search Console. Yeah, I mean, it's something where I think you can't take any generic tool that just like scrapes your website and says, oh, this word is only mentioned there twice and you need to mention it 3 times, because I don't really think that is that actionable.
Thank you.
John, what do you think Google will do, for example, if everyone stops using Chrome and then everyone, let's say, starts using headless browsers? Then how would Google identify the user experience?
Great question.
I don't understand what you mean.
Well, for example, I mean, because I don't know how Google, Google. How does Google identify the like long clicks, short clicks, and like the bounce rate and stuff? Because they need to understand is listens and events, and you can do it by maybe in Chrome. But let's say users are using headless browsers, so they are sending without refers all this traffic. Then Google will not be able to identify if this is organic or not, and they will not be able to listen where they clicked. So then how would Google identify?
You're making a lot of assumptions there. that's I think there are lots of kind of assumptions in there that don't really play a role. And especially like if everybody was using headless Chrome or headless browser, it's kind of, I don't know, an unrealistic world. And from our point of view, what we mostly look at is try to figure out which algorithms work best for ranking. So from that point of view, it's something that's independent of browsers. It's something that we've been doing before there was Chrome, when people were using Firefox or like the early versions of Internet Explorer. It's like we still have to evaluate our algorithms to figure out which one of these algorithms is actually working better or not. And these are things that kind of continuously work, and we continuously work on trying to improve them.
Well, John, there seems to be, there's often a lot of conversation around, we're going to end up, the URL is going to die, because it's not scalable. It seems to me it is scalable because you've got the likes of, oh God, what's it called? The guy who basically, the guy who wrote the bow tie of the web. He's basically built stuff that is scalable to every URL in the world and picks from patterns and so on and so forth. So it kind of is scalable because there's lots of signals about what to swerve, what to crawl, what to just do this with that with the other with, and you can scale it on like a very big scale. Is that right?
I don't see the URLs going away anytime soon. I think like as a way of addressing content that's essentially a pretty stable system. It just basically works. Imagine like on some devices which is also fine. Like on mobile, you don't really have room to see the whole URL, and people don't really like need to see the whole URL there. But in general, I don't see the URL going away in the sense that we'll have some magical new way of addressing content on the internet and be able to look it up and kind of understand what it's about and point people to that without using a URL. I mean, who knows? In like 50 years, maybe things will be very different. But at least in the meantime, we have to have some way of addressing content and pointing people at content. And URLs just work really well for that.
Okay.
Let me run through some of the other questions that were submitted, and then we should have a bit more time as well for others here. We migrated from HTTP to HTTPS, but we can't select the HTTPS version of our site and disavow. We're unsure if Search Console needs both properties. What do we need to do? Yes, if you migrate to HTTPS, then you should add that to your Search Console account as well, and then you can use that for the disavow tool. So you can kind of download the old file and upload it with the HTTPS version. Let's see. There's using hreflang will swap the URL, and a new ccTLD might be ranking lower. So why should I do that? So when it comes to hreflang, we actually kind of swap out the highest ranking URL. So it's not the case that we will rank your website lower because you're using hreflang, but rather when we rank pages from your website, we will try to look at the top ones. And if we have an alternate version that matches the user's location and settings better, we'll swap out that one. So it's not the case that your site will rank lower because of using hreflang. Hreflang doesn't change rankings. Let's see. You said all index pages will be evaluated when determining quality of a site. Let's say we have 100 posts published and 400 thin pages published by accident, maybe like WordPress media attachment files. Even though Google isn't sending traffic to those 400 thin pages, can we say, oh, we've indexed 400 pages and a bunch of them are bad, so we're going to demote your site? Google does look at your site overall, so we try to take a look at the whole picture. But we do understand that not every page is as relevant for the website as other pages. So just because we've accidentally indexed a bunch of kind of crufty content doesn't necessarily mean that your site is bad. So I wouldn't really worry about this. But at the same time, if you're noticing that this is happening and you want to take control of that, you can take control of that by either putting no index on those pages, if these are just like accidentally published pages, or maybe even serving a 404 or a 301 redirect to the actual preferred version if you have kind of a mapping there. All of those are good ways to kind of take control of this. But overall, we understand that websites have a lot of crufty content that's generated automatically by a CMS, and that's no problem for us either.
John, is it evaluated at a sectional level? Sorry, just really quickly. Is it evaluated maybe at a site section level? So say you have a very content-rich blog, it's really engaging, you have really useful calculators, loads of wonderful stuff, but then you have like this really weak and like thin and pretty sort of repetitive pages section. There's a big part of it. Would you judge those two parts differently once you realize that actually this is a better section, that's a naff section?
Sometimes that does happen, yeah. So one of the places where that can happen is when it comes to crawling, where if we can recognize that this is actually part of a website that's kind of irrelevant and just a lot of cruft that's generated with URL parameters, for example, then we'll try to kind of weigh those sections differently and say this is the part that we really want to focus on, and this is the part that we kind of know is there and we kind of look at every now and then, but it's not the primary part of the site.
OK, thank you.
OK, there's a question from Jarno, which I think is interesting as well, with regards to structured data. So I think he asked a while back with regards to putting all kinds of structured data markup on a page. And I said, it probably doesn't make sense to just like stuff a page with structured data. And on the other hand, Gary at a recent conference said, well, actually, we do take into account a lot of structured data, even if we don't use it for kind of a rich snippet. And from my point of view, I think both of those are still pretty valid in the sense that we do use structured data to try to understand the context of a page a little bit better. But the direct effect is more of the visible side, where like this is what we show in the search results when it comes to rich snippets. So I would still try to find a balance there and think about where it does make sense to provide extra context. Maybe that's something that you can do pretty much for free if you have structured database that you're putting into your website, and you can mark up all of the names or mark up all of the locations, and that's something that kind of comes for free, then maybe go for that. But on the other hand, I wouldn't go through the schema.org website and think about all of the possible things that could be marked up and just manually go through your website and try to add all of that markup as well, because that's just a lot of extra bloat that you're putting into your pages, and probably they don't really help us that much at all. So that's something where you kind of need to find a middle ground there with regards to putting markup on pages that you think either would be shown in the search results as a rich snippet, or might be shown in the near future. Maybe you kind of like see where Google is headed, and you think, oh, Google is going to show this type of markup next. Then maybe that's something you kind of want to bet on and put on your pages. Additionally, if there's something that you kind of really feel strongly about, or that you can get for free from your CMS, from the database that's powering your website, then that might be something worth adding. But I kind of caution away from just like blindly adding all possible kind of structured data, because that probably is just a lot of extra work, a lot of extra maintenance overhead that doesn't provide any value for search. What is your advice to optimize for artificial intelligence? I don't actually have a lot of input. That's like a very broad question. Yeah, I don't think I have anything that I could add within a minute or so around that. But it's definitely an interesting topic. let's see. Oh gosh, so many questions. Wow, they all come while we're live. I just have a few minutes left, so maybe I'll just open it up to you all. What else is on your mind that I need to kind of get through and answer?
Yeah, John.
Yes, go ahead. Or maybe not.
I'm sorry about that. Is that a garden gnome?
Yeah. Oh. Okay.
John, I've got a really quick question. If the guy is the gnome doesn't know, I have got a really quick question actually. I remember a long time ago you said something and it's resonated with me for a long time, and I keep thinking about it. So you said sometimes when there are sites with many pages that are not similar but kind of equally potential candidates for similar extensions of a primary target, yeah? So shoes, and then you have like lots of different types of shoes. Sorry. I remember you said that actually that kind of setup could mean that ultimately you can't rank for anything generic. Is that because you have lots of children that actually are also, and maybe grandchild pages that are also candidates for a categories target term? Everything gets divided relevance-wise amongst all the children and the grandchildren and sort of, yeah, so stealing almost, yeah. Does it mean that ultimately you're probably never going to rank the category as such because relevance is spread? Remember Matt Cutt saying something about division between lots of different pages. And I remember you saying it means you can't rank for anything generic.
I don't know. I don't quite understand the context.
I'll think. You've not got time now, but I'll have a think about how to maybe put it a bit better. Yeah.
Okay. I see one question in the chat as well. We have many internal filter links on category pages of an e-commerce site which have no follow. Is that okay? That's pretty much okay. Yeah, I think you can do that. We have some, I think, blog posts and Help Center content on faceted navigation. So I would look that up and see what the advice is there. There are different ways that you can handle this type of situation. Using a no-follow there is probably OK, too, in the sense that we're probably not going to dig too far into those facets anyway. So that kind of helps us to focus on the actual results pages there. But there are many different ways of looking at this. So what I would do is double check our Help Center and the blog. And if you're still unsure, I would post in the Webmaster Help Forum with actual examples from your website so that people can take a look and see, is this actually good, or is this something that you need to change, or is this like good enough and you don't really need to spend too much time on it?
One quick question. It was very interesting to see that in one of the domains that I manage, they had a retail page, let's say X, and unfortunately, the AdWords team, the PPC team, created a landing page for AdWords, but made it indexed. Then I realized it the next day, and I no-indexed it. Then I even actually, I no-indexed it, and I waited. Then the ranking starts fluctuating. It was ranking number 1, number 2 for the very important keywords that it should rank. Then it starts fluctuating to number 3, 4. And then I gave 404, and nothing changed. Now I gave 410. So that created kind of like a duplication in between the sites, but it was unintended, and I covered it right away, but it still keeps fluctuating. I don't know why.
What you can do in cases like that is use a submit URL feature in Search Console to tell us that this page has actually updated very quickly. And that's something you can do in Search Console with the Fetch's Googlebot tool. And in the search results, we also, for some queries like submit URL to Google, we show this one box that you can also use for that. So that might be an option the next time, like especially if you set it to no index, and if we can crawl it and see the no index, then we can take that into account fairly quickly. Or if you use a rel canonical on there to kind of point to your preferred version, that's also something that we can take into account fairly quickly. But if you don't tell us about that change, then maybe we'll kind of keep it in our index for a couple of days. And then when we actually do recrawl it, then we'll take that into account.
John, is there a priority? Do you remember that question I asked you on Twitter the other day about the fact they submit to index? Yeah. Is there a priority given to some sites or some URLs, not sites, URLs of others? So say, for instance, CNN's, I know CNN's homepage is likely using the API anyway for things, but say a really important homepage of a site gets submitted versus some low-level crappy,
yeah.
Let's say crappy, probably not, yeah, page that you know has got some issues. Are you going to like react quicker with submit to index? On that one, request index in crappy code.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of abuse with these features, so we have to find a way to kind of balance that. So that can definitely happen there.
Yeah.
All right, so it's been great having you all here. I need to take a break and go run off. But I have the next Hangouts planned for Thursday in German and Friday in English again. So feel free to copy your questions over there if you still need an answer to something. Thanks again for joining, and hope to see you all again next time.
Thank you, John. We appreciate it.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.